They called it peace. They called it the reward for surviving. But for some men, this soft life isn't a blessing. It's a slow erasure, a quiet trap dressed in comfort. They told him to slow down, to rest, to enjoy life, to make it gentle. But something in him resisted. Not out of pride, but for no purpose. Because a man doesn't stop living when he turns 50. He starts living, without illusions. They told him life would finally get easier, but no one warned him what comfort without purpose really feels like. They told him life would finally get easier, that after decades of showing up, providing, protecting, performing, he'd earned the right to slow down. They sold him the dream of a soft life. Wake up when you want, play golf in the morning, take naps in the afternoon, sip wine at sunset, watch the news, water the plants, maybe take a short trip to somewhere quiet and forget the world ever asked anything of you. And for a while, he believed it, because it sounded good, peaceful, deserved. He stopped working as much, bought the reclining chair, cancelled the meetings, let the phone ring. He traded hustle for stillness, responsibility for rest, structure for space. But no one warned him about what happens when a man who has spent his whole life in motion suddenly has nowhere to go. No one told him that stillness without purpose doesn't feel like peace. It feels like being erased. He thought rest would heal him, but rest without direction, it numbed him. The chair was soft, but his spine ached. The wine was aged, but it couldn't fill the silence. The calendar was empty, but so was his spirit. You see, there's a strange kind of ache that comes when a man realizes he's no longer being asked to rise. No more pressure, no more fire, no more reasons to wake up with a mission. And at first, it felt like freedom, but slowly, it started to feel like disappearance. He didn't miss the chaos. He didn't want the deadlines. He didn't need the applause. But something inside him kept whispering, "Is this it?" Because what they never told him was this: you can have all the comfort in the world, but without meaning, comfort becomes a cage. A man wasn't made just to relax. He was made to build, to protect, to align with something deeper. And when you take all that away, he doesn't feel safe. He feels lost. So now, he sits on that balcony, the one they said would bring peace. But instead, he stares into the distance, searching for something no one warned him he would miss. A reason, a mission, a pulse beneath the stillness. Because what he was promised after 50 was a soft life. But what he's quietly craving now is something real. He got everything they said he should want, and still something inside him felt quietly unfinished. The quiet was too quiet. At first it felt like relief. No alarms, no meetings, no rush. Just long mornings, slow afternoons, and evenings that stretched on like shadows. But after a while, it all began to blur. Days lost their edges. Time stopped having texture. The hours no longer felt earned, they just arrived. He tried to enjoy it, tried to sit in silence and feel grateful. Tried to embrace the softness, the stillness. But something inside him kept stirring, because deep down, he didn't need more pillows. He needed more purpose. He didn't need scented candles. He needed to light a fire inside his chest again. The books on his shelf stayed unopened. The shows on television couldn't hold his attention. Even the hobbies once beloved felt like distractions, not direction. You see, there's a difference between rest and stagnation. A difference between peace and passivity. And that difference? It's called a challenge. That's what he missed. Something to solve. Something to build. Something to struggle through, not for stress, but for significance. There were no more deadlines. No more people asking for his opinion. No one is calling him needed. No one depends on his strength. And slowly, almost invisibly, he started to feel irrelevant. Not useless, he knew he could still contribute, but under-utilized, like a powerful engine idling in a quiet garage, waiting for a road that no longer called his name. There were no conversations that stirred his blood, no projects that demanded his depth, no tension to pull him forward, just comfort and routine and a creeping sense of invisibility. He stopped checking the clock, stopped planning his weeks, stopped looking forward to anything, Because when a man stops being challenged, he doesn't relax. He starts to wither. He doesn't say it out loud. He smiles, says he's fine. But inside, he's grieving a loss no one sees. The loss of being needed. The loss of feeling essential. The loss of that subtle fire that comes from having a place in the fight. And the worst part? He started to feel like a man not living, but lingering. Not choosing life, but waiting quietly to fade. They said he'd traded stress for peace. But the truth? He had traded stress for numbness. And no one told him that when life gets too easy, a man doesn't feel free. He feels forgotten. He didn't want escape. He wanted a challenge that still made him feel like a man. He wasn't tired of fighting. He was tired of fighting for nothing. See, people misunderstand men like him. They think we want peace because we're worn out. That we long for stillness because we're fragile. That we crave the soft life because we've broken. But the truth? Men aren't afraid of pressure. We're afraid of wasting it. He remembered the long hours, the deadlines, the expectations, and how, beneath all that weight, he still felt alive. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered. He never resented the responsibility. What he resented was being told that the end goal of all that pressure was just a chair, a golf course, and a glass of wine at dusk. Because somewhere along the way, he realized something most men only admit in the quiet. I don't want to do less. I want something worth doing. End of pre. The soft life? It softened everything. His edges, his urgency, even his identity. And it hit him one morning. Waking up late, no alarm, no plans. The sun was already up. But he wasn't. He didn't want freedom from waking up early. He wanted a reason to rise. He didn't want freedom from structure. He wanted something to build. He didn't want to float through time. He wanted time to matter again. The problem with a soft life isn't the comfort. It's the emptiness that follows, when comfort becomes your only pursuit. Because when there's no hill to climb, a man forgets how to stand tall. And when there's no fire to walk through, he forgets how much strength he really has. He didn't want a hammock. He wanted a hammer, not to break things, but to build something solid, something hard-earned, something that required his hands, his heart, and his history. He didn't want an escape from the world. He wanted to wrestle with it to leave a mark, even if it left some on him too. Give me something hard, he thought, as long as it's real, as long as I can feel it, as long as it means I'm still in the fight. Because ease without meaning, that's not peace. That's paralysis. He wasn't asking for chaos. He was asking for challenge. The kind that awakens a man, sharpens him, keeps him anchored. Because in a life with no weight to carry, he had forgotten how strong he still was. And what he wanted now wasn't to be free from the burden, but to carry something that mattered. It took him years to realize. Peace and passivity can look the same on the outside, but feel very different in the soul. Some people confuse quiet with healing. He did too. In the beginning, the silence felt like medicine. No one needed anything from him. No phones ringing, no deadlines looming. Just long stretches of time and stillness. At first it felt like peace, but then he noticed something deeper. He wasn't thinking more clearly. He wasn't feeling more whole. He wasn't growing. He was simply fading. He thought he had found rest, but what he had stumbled into was passivity dressed as peace. Because here's what no one tells you. The absence of noise isn't the presence of peace. It's just absence, and absence when stretched over days, then weeks, starts to feel like drifting. He wasn't grounded. He wasn't rooted. He wasn't reaching for anything anymore. He wasn't at war, but he also wasn't alive. It was a strange kind of numbness. Not pain, but the absence of feeling altogether, a spiritual anesthetic. He would wake up rested, but uninspired. He would go to bed early, but not fulfilled. He wasn't stressed, but he wasn't stirred either. So one morning, he sat with his coffee, the early light bleeding through the blinds, and he asked himself the question he had been avoiding for months. Have I retired from stress, or have I retired from myself? And when the answer came, it wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It just settled in his chest like truth. He realized he hadn't been protecting his peace. He had been hiding inside a version of comfort that no longer fit his spirit. He had removed conflict, but also removed curiosity. He had escaped discomfort, but also escaped growth. He had said no to pressure, but also said no to possibility. In his pursuit of safety, he had stopped risking anything, and without risk, there is no truth. Because truth isn't born in silence alone. It's born in the wrestle, in the edge of uncertainty, in the fire of trying something that might not work. Peace is powerful, but passivity? Passivity is slow death. It's the quiet surrender, the kind where no one sees you bleed because you're not bleeding. You're just slowly disappearing. So he made a decision. If something doesn't challenge him, it doesn't change him. And from that moment forward, he stopped confusing being undisturbed with being awake. Just because he stepped away from the world didn't mean the fire inside him had gone out. He wasn't done. Not in his bones, not in his spirit, not in that deep, unspoken place inside a man, where purpose lives long after applause fades. People assumed he was finished. That because he had stepped back from the boardroom, he had nothing left to give. But they were wrong. The fire was still there. Maybe quieter now, but not dimmed. Not defeated. Not the fire of ambition, but of alignment. He didn't crave another title, didn't dream of promotions or climbing some final corporate ladder. That chapter had closed, and rightfully so. But now, a new fire had begun to stir. Not the fire to compete, but to contribute. Not to prove something, but to pour something out. He found himself drawn to younger men, not to impress them, but to guide them, to pass on what he had painfully learned, to protect them from the traps he had once walked into blindly. He didn't need a second youth. He needed a first, real manhood. Not the kind measured in achievements, but in alignment. Not the manhood defined by how much he could conquer, but by how deeply he could serve. He asked different questions now. Not, what can I get? But, what can I give? Not, how do I stay relevant? But, what legacy am I leaving behind? And when he walked past a mirror, he no longer checked for wrinkles or age spots. He checked for clarity in his eyes, because that was the real sign he was still alive. Who can I serve today? What can I build that outlives me? What wisdom have I carried for too long that needs to be released? He didn't want recognition. He wanted resonance. He didn't want adrenaline. He wanted alignment. He didn't want a second act. He wanted to mentor someone else into theirs. And the strange, beautiful truth, the more he gave from that place, the stronger the fire grew, because men don't burn out from doing too much. They burn out from doing what no longer stirs their soul. And now, his soul was stirred again, by meaning, by mentorship, by the slow, sacred work of building something that wasn't about him, but about what comes after him, because true manhood isn't about arrival. It's about contribution, and that fire in his chest, it wasn't for glory. It wasn't for comfort. It was for impact. And that kind of fire doesn't go out with age. It deepens. He wasn't the only one. Quietly, more men were waking up and walking away from comfort that felt like a lie. He wasn't alone. That's what surprised him most. For a long time, he thought he was the only one. The only man who sat in silence and felt something was missing. The only one who looked around at his comfortable life and quietly whispered, "This isn't it." But the more awake he became, the more clearly he started to see. He began noticing other men. Not loud ones. Not the ones who boasted about still grinding in their 60-second. Not the ones clinging to youth through fast cars or younger women. No, these men were quieter, calmer, more rooted. They weren't chasing recognition. They were chasing alignment. He saw it in the way they carried themselves. Shoulders relaxed, but eyes alert. Voices soft, but words with weight. They weren't interested in small talk anymore. They were interested in substance. Some had returned to work, not because they needed the income, but because they missed the meaning. They didn't need paychecks. They needed purpose. Some had started writing the book they'd buried under decades of excuses. Some were out in their garages at 6 a.m., not tinkering, creating. Some were building cabins with their bare hands. Some were lifting weights not for vanity, but to honor the vessel that still carried them forward. And others, they had become mentors, uncles, father figures, not by appointment, but by quiet availability. They had begun showing up for younger men, not to preach, but to guide, to listen, to offer something this world desperately lacks: presence with wisdom. These men, they weren't anti-soft. They didn't shame comfort. They just knew when comfort became a cover for fear, for drift, for surrender. They weren't addicted to the hard life, but they craved the real one, the kind of life where your hands still have calluses, where your thoughts still stretch, where your words still matter. They didn't need things to be easy. They just needed things to be true. Because when a man has lived long enough, he starts craving what's honest, more than what's pleasant. He stops asking, what feels good, and starts asking, what's real even if it's hard. These were the men who rejected false comfort, not because they hated rest, but because they refused to retire from purpose. And when he saw them, he felt less alone, because now he understood this wasn't the end of his usefulness. It was the awakening of a deeper, clearer kind of strength. No, it's not perfect. But life after 50, when it's lived on your terms, is more real than ever. It's not passive. It's not perfect. It's not pain-free. But it's honest. That's the new definition of a good life. Not comfort without cost, but clarity without compromise. Real life after hell treads doesn't mean giving up. It means giving differently. It means showing up, not because someone told you to, but because you chose to. It means waking up without an alarm, but still beating the sun, because your soul has things it wants to do, not things it's forced to. It looks like saying no to people who drain you. No more guilt, no more explaining yourself, just quiet boundaries held with firm kindness. Saying yes to projects that stretch you, not to impress, but to grow, because you finally understand challenge isn't the enemy, stagnation is. Fixing things because you enjoy the craft, the rhythm, the solitude, the satisfaction of doing something with your hands, just for the love of doing it, not because anyone's watching. Showing up early, not for the paycheck, but because discipline is your legacy. You don't need an audience. You need a standard. Embracing discomfort, not as punishment, but as a doorway. Because you've learned, every time you step into discomfort, you find a deeper version of yourself on the other side. That's what real life looks like after 50. Not loud, not flashy, not curated for social media, but anchored, grounded in truth, rooted in wisdom, guided by conviction. You don't chase anymore. You choose. You don't perform. You participate with full presence. You no longer need to be understood. You just need to be clear with yourself. Because here's the truth. Most men never say out loud, you don't stop being a man when you stop working. You stop being a man when you stop growing. Growth now isn't about titles. It's about depth. It's not about building empires. It's about building inner strength, the kind that no one sees, but everyone feels when you walk into a room. That's real life after half treads. Not a retreat, not an escape, but un refinement, a return, not to youth, but to the kind of manhood you always hoped you'd grow into. And if the world doesn't understand it, that's okay, because real men don't need applause. They need alignment. To every man who's been told to rest, relax, and retire his fire, if soft life feels wrong to you, it's not because you're broken. It's because you're still burning. You were not made to float. You were made to forge. You were not built for early retirement. You were built for late impact. So go do something that makes your hands dirty, your spine straighter, your mornings meaningful. And when they ask why you're not settling into a soft life, tell them, because I'm finally building a real one.